Welcome to Smart Route, the podcast by CallTrackingMetrics, where you'll hear stories from businesses at the intersection of marketing, customer experience, and sales. We're sitting down with business leaders and industry experts to dive deep into the path they took to find success. Here's your host, Courtney Tyson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of Smart Route. I'm your host and strategic partnership manager at CallTrackingMetrics, Courtney Tyson. Thank you for listening in. As you should know, March is Women's History Month, which celebrates the vital role women play in American history and society as a whole. And in the spirit of celebrating women, we have invited executive leadership coach Jen Coken to talk to us more about the obstacles women face in their journeys to break glass ceilings, how to overcome them, embrace life, and lead as our authentic selves. We are so excited to chat with you today. Jen, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to learning some new things and building up my confidence along the way. So before we get started, I'm going to share a little bit about you with our audience. Jen works with women in power positions who don't feel so powerful anymore. She shatters their self-doubt so they can learn to love themselves, embrace their genius, and own their success. She has been recognized by ABC, MSNBC, and TEDx. She's an international peak performance coach, a Fortune 500 speaker, imposter syndrome expert, and a recovering stand-up comedian. Fortune 500 clients, as seven-figure CEOs trust Jen to shake things up with no apologies, no limits, and no laughs.
We have
so
to
with
have
that
fun.
said, yes. With that said, we're going to have fun. And those were kind of your bio words. But Jen, tell us a little more about yourself in your own words and what led you to begin your business.
I was born in a small white house. No, kidding. No, I have been coaching people for over 25 years. And excuse me, about 7 years ago, began to notice that women who were in male-dominated industries, where I had spent most of my career in politics, in at the energy industry, places like that, were facing the same kinds of dilemmas that I did. And I am really committed to empowering them to show up as themselves. And one of the turning points for me was I was a keynote speaker for the Society of Women Engineers in Denver. And I was talking to some of the young women there, and they were telling me these stories, Courtney, about how they didn't wear makeup to work and they never dressed up because their male counterparts would ask them if either they had a date and then would grill them about that, or ask them if they were going for an interview. And I thought, that is so inappropriate. So it made them change who they were. And I said, enough. And I always love this statistic, which is in 2018, there were 25 women who were leading Fortune 500 companies and 23 men named John.
Wow.
Yeah. My commitment and goal is to give women the confidence to show up as their entire self at work. That includes embracing their femininity, as well as the masculine side of getting things done and feeling like they can be themselves. Because the more you rise up the corporate ladder, you see fewer and fewer people who look like you. And so you don't have the same kinds of cues. And so, unfortunately, and I learned this the hard way too, is we begin to lead like men in a lot of ways. Now, I am not, I love guys. That's not the issue for me. But I think when we start being some of those ways of being that are not productive, like being arrogant or being full of ourselves, that's not who we are. That's not who the guys are that are being that way either. Everybody has masculine and feminine. We need that masculine drive to get things done. But I'm committed that women also embrace their feminine side of the interdependence of the creating community. And gosh knows we need it now with the pandemic and hybrid work environments and people just being disconnected. No longer do we have those opportunities to kind of, hey, I'm going to pop by your cubicle and say hi, or, the sort of just general chit chat. And so it's a way for us to feel more comfortable at work. If we're comfortable with who we are, we can bring our whole selves to work. Then we're also creating that environment for the people around us and the people who report to us. And I just feel really strongly about that. That's where it all came from.
I love that you've been able to take your career, but your life experiences and build, obviously you're so passionate about helping women, but the fact that you've been able to build a business on helping women through your experiences and what you've learned is it's really amazing. And I'm interested to know, so, through your experience working as a woman in different industries and working with women in different industries and, women from different walks of life too. Do you see different experiences for female leaders across different industries or from women across different generations, perhaps?
That's an interesting question. I feel like I have 3 answers. One is human being is human being. And so you could call it a human experience. Everybody has a human experience of questioning their leadership, wondering if they're going to fit in. Do they have what it takes? Men and women question it differently. And I think I don't see differences across industries, but generations, yes. I do feel like the executives that I usually coach, because they're at that level, are in their 40s and 50s or older. I'm 58. And so they're at a time in their lives when they're thinking about transitioning out of work and what's the next step. Yes, you could call that retirement, but each one of us wants to leave the planet feeling like we made a difference. And we don't ever take time to think that through or really take time to steep in what is my vision and what's the difference I want to make. And so I think, quite honestly, women who are in their 20s and 30s, which generation is that? I never get this right. It's not Gen X, it's millennials.
I'm a millennial.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
feel like your generation is much more purpose focused and how am I giving back and what's my impact on the world than my generation ever was, or even I'm Gen X. The baby boomers know Gen X not as much. I mean, I also was a grassroots activist for 30 years, so I have that background of making a difference. And I think women in their 20s and 30s, millennials, are already thinking about the impact they want to make. And I think that can prove to be frustrating if they can't be themselves at work, because there's a lot of conversation around authenticity. What the heck does that mean? Whole other conversation we could have. And then I feel like women in my generation and above, or 40s and 50s and higher, we're coming to that place sometimes as a result of thinking about transitioning out of our current job into, say, a consultancy role, or no longer wanting to work because we're done working, kind of thing. Or it could be, people call it a midlife crisis. I call it a soul life crisis. It's this moment where around 42 to 49, if you are not fulfilling the purpose you came to fulfill, your soul will come knocking at the door and keep like pointing you in different directions and trying to show you the way for you to feel complete. This is my personal philosophy before you exit this physical existence. And if you don't learn that lesson this time, guess what? You get another opportunity next time you incarnate. So woohoo!
Love it. That's great. It's an interesting philosophy. It is.
Yeah, I've
Mm.
had it for a long time, and a lot of it came about from my mom passing away from ovarian cancer back in 2011. She was misdiagnosed for a year. And when she was finally diagnosed, it was stage 4, but she lived 5 years, 1 month, and 8 days. And during that 5-year cycle, I got really interested in death and the afterlife and what happens, and began questioning a lot of things. And that's
Mhm.
kind of where I ended up, that we're all here to fulfill a purpose, that we choose the life that we incarnate into to learn particular
Mhm.
lessons that our soul wants us to learn.
I love that. It's also something interesting to think about too, and I'm sorry to hear about your mother, but, I was hanging out with 2 of my best friends this weekend who I've met along my career journey, and something that we had been talking about was, as, female, biology, and how, we have not been researched the way maybe men have been, and so dealing with medical issues as a woman is a little different and sometimes a little more complex than, maybe issues that men deal with, so it's interesting to think just, how society as a whole has always kind of looked at masculine versus feminine and the attention that we kind of get in a sort because of the role we play in society. So,
Well, it's not even that it hasn't been researched as much. Most studies are based on men between the ages of 18 and 29, period. End of story.
mm,
They don't take
gotcha.
into account women because we weren't seen as, other than being owned. We're gonna get down a rabbit hole here, but given the
Right.
fact that we didn't get the chance for the right to vote till the 20s, I mean, the Equal Rights Amendment hasn't even passed yet.
Right.
So,
Right. Hmm.
and thank
I,
God, quite honestly, for the Me Too movement, which kind of woke people up, but didn't wake people up enough.
enough.
and we can't get
Right.
complacent. And we've got to continue to not just speak our truth, but speak our value and take a stand for ourselves. Because one of the things that happens to women in the workplace is we get labeled. We get labeled as the B word, we get labeled as aggressive, we get labeled, and women of color get labeled even worse,
Right.
than white women. So, and if men were demonstrating or using those same types of behaviors, they would have been told they're great leaders and they're being effective and they're taking charge. So it's interesting because I always tell my potential clients and the clients I work with, you either love me or hate me. Number one, you're either going to cry or laugh every call. Hopefully, you're laughing more than crying because I help people embrace the ridiculousness of life because we make up so many stories. But I'm also very direct. I have a BS meter a mile long, and I will say something. And it's not, I'm learning in my wiser years. I'm not going to say in my old age because I don't feel old, but in my wiser years to be more diplomatic. But I used to be very, very blunt. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
I made mistakes. It doesn't mean you can't be direct. Sometimes direct is what you need and who
Right.
you need to be.
Yeah. Sure. I agree. I agree. I think sometimes that's the best way to get the message across. Don't bring your emotions into it, right? Being direct is best. You had talked a little bit about the women's suffrage movement and, eventually us getting the right to vote, right? And thinking about how that kind of ties into imposter syndrome and how, we fought so hard for the right to vote, but yet we're still being told you shouldn't be voting. Like you shouldn't have the right to vote, right? So of course that kind of puts in this, I think for women, puts us in this mindset of, well, like and then imposter syndrome, right? Like, should I be voting? Like, it kind of could almost be taken back to those days, right? So that's maybe when imposter syndrome started. Who knows? But let's talk about imposter syndrome a little bit.
Yeah.
You've mentioned it a couple of times. I know you're an expert in this. Let's talk about your unique take on imposter syndrome. Share that with us, how you define it, and what led you to framing it in the way that you do, Jen.
Yeah, I'd love to. Imposter syndrome has been around as long as we've been human, as long as human beings have roamed the planet. And how come it's called imposter syndrome is back in the 70s, two researchers were doing a study of women in a PhD program, recognizing that they thought at the time women had a higher rate of feeling like a fraud and feeling like they didn't belong. Studies now show, and as recently as 2 years ago, that 70% of workers, like people in the workplace, experience not belonging, questioning and doubting themselves, etc. So imposter syndrome isn't even a syndrome because it's not a medical diagnosis. At the time, those researchers coined the phrase imposter phenomenon, meaning it's phenomenological, meaning it's as lived, as experienced. So it's an experience of feeling like a fraud or an expert. I'm sorry, not an expert, of feeling like a fraud or feeling like you're not an expert. So why do I say it's been around as long as human beings have been around? Because every human has a brain. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. The brain's job is to predict danger, to predict threat. Now, that used to be physical threats, right? Now it's psychological threats. So the brain is constantly interpreting data and attempting to compartmentalize to make the human it's a brain of more comfortable. So, for example, I was in Boston last week, and it actually freakishly snowed. And I didn't have the right shoes with me. So I go to step outside and immediately I'm scared. I'm walking gingerly because if you've lived in any snowy area, you've slipped on the ice at least one time. And so the brain was taking in that information and saying, whoa, be careful. So the brain's constantly doing that. And the average brain has 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. 85% are negative.
Wow.
95% are repetitive. So when we're in a situation, let's say at work, and our boss calls on us, or we have to do a presentation that we haven't done before, or perhaps we've done the presentation, but it's to a new group. Perhaps we're doing a presentation for a potential client, right? Immediately the brain's going to go, oh, danger. And you're going to have the experience as lived. It's actually the amygdala, which governs the fight, flight, and freeze aspect of the human brain, which is also known as the reptilian brain, because that's the thing that's kept us alive. The moment the amygdala gets triggered, the prefrontal cortex, or the logical reasoning, goes down. The more your cortisol levels go up, the reasoning messages go down. And it's the inverse relationship too. So the moment that happens, you're immediately wanting to defend or understand, how can I protect myself? And that's what most people, most coaches, if you go on the internet, you'll find, last count, I think it was 3.4 million tips, tools, and tricks for how to overcome imposter syndrome. And I tell people,
Mhm.
you can't. You
Mhm.
can. There's one point where you do it, but you're dead.
Yeah.
And then they bury you, put dirt on you, and go to Denny's and talk about you, because that's what people do after you're dead. They talk about you,
Sure.
hopefully, right?
Right. Hopefully
So
in a good way.
yeah, so if you're trying to overcome something, okay, the thing you're trying to come over stays stuck. So if I'm hiking in Colorado and I come across a big boulder, I'm hiking in Virginia, there's a couple trails where there's huge boulders you have to scramble over. I have to go over it, around it. That thing is going to stay stuck. So the more you try to manage your perfectionism, the more you try to manage those thoughts, the more stuck they're going to get. What you resist persists. So the way that I
Mhm.
approach this is, okay, we know everybody has imposter syndrome. And by the way, if you don't have it, you're not playing a big enough game, because it only gets triggered when you are confronted or stretching yourself. If you're not stretching yourself, you don't have to worry about it. If you want to sit on the couch and watch Love Island and eat the cherry bonbons, the chocolate covered cherries, you won't have imposter syndrome. But if you're
Right.
about to do a TEDx talk, or you're about to ask for a promotion, or you're new to a job, or you want to speak up in a meeting where it hasn't felt like comfortable territory before, that's going to come up. So, what I do
Mhm.
with my clients is I have a very specific process, because my philosophy has been that everybody's imposter syndrome comes back to maybe three, potentially five incidents that happened to them, what I call defining moments when they were a kid, usually sometime between the ages of 4 and 12.
Mhm.
And when we're able to identify, because the moment the brain experiences some emotion that's unwanted, or a situation that's unwanted, shame, embarrassment, it's going to try to protect you, because it thinks it's
Mhm.
a matter of life or death. It's not a matter of life or death, but the brain doesn't know any different. So it's going to want to protect you. When we can identify and unlock that brain pattern, all of a sudden something else becomes possible, because you're no longer an upset 6 year old in a 34-year-old's body driving the bus
Mhm.
called your life. You're like, oh, that was my
Right.
upset 6 year old. I'll give you a really good example. I have a client, she is super successful, former client, and very driven. But she came to me because she said, it doesn't matter how successful I am, I'm never satisfied. And she was making herself crazy and making herself sick. And what we got to, so interesting, because it's often either these defining moments are your relationship to authority or your experience of belonging in a group.
Mhm.
So with
Mhm.
her, it was belonging in a group. She went to a cousin's house, and the cousin had some clothes she was giving away, and it was all name brand clothes. And she picked up a pair of white jeans, and she said, "Oh," and her aunt said, "Oh, sweetie, you're too big to fit into those." And in that
Mhm.
moment, she experienced shame and embarrassment. Some people might have said, okay, put them back and skulked away, and maybe they had a different story that they made up. She was like, I'm going to show you, went in the bedroom like we used to back then, and lay down on the bed, and you slide them up and take a hanger in the zipper, because there was no spandex back then. And
Mm.
our own form of Spanx, but we're in Levi's,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And what she realized is, she said, I'm going to show you. And how that shows up and as an adult is, she's very driven. The problem is, she doesn't have a choice about being driven. So it
Mhm.
was zapping her health. It was zapping her mental space. It was just crushing her ability to dream big, because she felt like, if she can't keep up at that pace. Once we identified that brain pattern and we unlocked it, now she's able to witness when that same thought comes up, when those same because the reason imposter phenomenon is said like that is, you are experiencing the butterflies in your stomach, or the pit in your stomach, or the sweaty palms, or armpits. So the physical sensations remain, the mood remains of being scared or being angry, whatever way the brain has designed for you to deal with that defining moment. So she's now in the driver's seat and she can choose to be driven. The beautiful thing about that story is, do you know she had never owned a pair of white jeans since that time? She
Oh
went
my
out,
goodness.
she went out 2 days later. She bought the white jeans. She rocked the heck out of them. Her son is a competitive rock climber, rocked the heck out of them and showed me pictures and then did a whole photo shoot. And now those jeans are all over her website because she's owning all of herself and who she is, all from one aunt saying, "Oh, honey, you're too big to put those on." And the brain makes up stories. And so the work
Mm-hmm.
I do with clients is separating fact from fiction. So you can be a witness, an impartial observer of those automatic responses. And when we are able to be an impartial observer, we're present. When we're present, we have presence. When we have
Mm-hmm.
presence, we have presence of what? Mind, to think clearly. Because the moment you have that amygdala hijack where you experience imposter syndrome, simply take 5 deep breaths. That's going to slow the cortisol down and your reasoning mind will level up. So you have presence of mind, you have presence of body to like slow your heart rate down and just get a hold of yourself, presence of soul to speak your truth, and presence of spirit to work through you. Spirit, God, Bob, your dog, whatever you want to call it. That's what I happen to call it.
Love it. It's a great story, but like just a great tip overall. Like it's great to dig in and really think about what it is that's putting you in this insecure state that's causing you to subconsciously act or think a certain way about yourself. But just the tip of, sitting back and deep breaths, right? Like I tell my daughter that all the time when she's frustrated, deep breaths, right? But just thinking that how that can help in the moment. Even just me thinking about, how I prepare for these episodes and recording and the fact that before I, hit the play button, I do have a little bit of imposter syndrome too, right?
Yeah.
So I love the deep breath, the deep breath tip. Are there any other like small tips like that, Jen, that we could use kind of throughout our days?
Yeah. I would say the deep breaths are great when you find your undies in a bunch. Take a minute and grab a piece of paper and write out what's bothering you. This could be at work, this could be at home. Write it all out. They did this and they said that and they didn't ask me their thing and I spoke up and nobody paid attention and then Kevin spoke up and everybody paid attention. Kevin, what are you doing? You know, once you write out whose fault it is and why it's their fault and how unlucky you are, a lot of people and don't do it on a computer or phone, journal. Why? Because using pen and paper accesses a different part of your brain. So if you don't like journaling, suck it up, put a timer on for 2 minutes. Just give yourself 2 minutes so the brain knows, okay, there's an end to this. Write it out. At the end of that time, when the timer's up or when you're done, go back and circle the facts. You will find there are few, very, very few. That one tip alone allows people to return to homeostasis where they can think clearly. Now, the next step after doing that is ask yourself, what else does this remind me of? Is there an earlier similar experience? So if you find yourself, remember we talked about just a little bit ago about what your purpose is. And if you don't learn, if you're not living true to your purpose, you'll keep getting opportunities to do so. So if you keep getting taken out by the same thing over and over again, meaning you don't feel empowered, you feel disempowered. That's what I mean by taken out. I don't mean like the mafia, is going to come. So if you feel disempowered in any moment, do that story writing, journaling, circle the facts, then ask yourself, is there something similar that happened to me earlier? Either with the same situation. So it could be uh, your agency of your relationship to authority. So maybe it's an earlier similar with someone else in authority, or maybe it's an earlier similar for a group, or maybe it's earlier similar for feeling like you don't fit in until you can get back to the earliest, most similar incident. And then you can see where it all started from. And again, ask yourself, okay, what story did I make up? Because there is a decision you take in the moment the amygdala is confronted and you have that experience of unwanted emotions. The origin story, the defining moment story, the brain makes up something that's going to make you successful. That's why I say make imposter syndrome your superpower. If you decided you had to be a perfectionist so that you were no longer embarrassed by your friends for getting a C when they all got A's, likely, and I'm saying this because it's true for one of my clients, that has allowed you to soar to great heights and be really successful. But there's no joy in being a perfectionist because you're not at choice. You're at the effect of something. It's like the default way is being a perfectionist. There's times we need to be perfectionists.
Hmm.
For the podcast, you want to be prepped. You want to have that perfectionist tendency of getting the right questions to me and doing the pre-call and all the things that you did, having the technology right. Kind of makes sense. You don't want to fly by the seat of your pants, right? But
Hmm.
then there's the your daughter and putting her toys away. Maybe sometimes you can leave them out for an extra day and you don't everything doesn't have to be cleaned up just so. I'm talking to myself too, by the way.
That's literally exactly what I was thinking though, as you were saying that, because I am the perfectionist in that, before I go to bed every night, my house needs to be spotless. And I'm like, but why? Is it because I think a friend is going to come over and they're going to judge me for the pile of toys on the floor or the sink, the dishes in my sink? Probably not. They're not going to care. They're coming to see me and my daughter, right? So little things like that I
Yep,
need to hear, right? We all need to hear to be able
we
to
do.
be our best selves. So,
Yeah, I'll tell you a little funny side story. When I was a kiddo, my grandmother lived with us and she taught me how to make my bed, I think when I was 5 or 6, and I was told every morning to make my bed, so I always made my bed. Always made my bed. And there's that whole leadership book about like make your bed first or something.
yes.
And to deprogram myself for a full-on month, I never made my bed. It was at first I was like horrified, about it. But it was sort of, it was sort of breaking myself of that automatic habit because I wanted it to be a choice. Now, some days I do, most days I do, some days I don't. And that's okay,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I like the thought of journaling too. I come from a family who likes to journal, but I am personally not a journaler, even though I should be. My next
No
question for
should
you,
be,
Jen, was
no shooting on yourself. No shooting on yourself.
true. Yes. Yes. I can start. I'm going to start it, right? So I think that journaling is great too because reading back on your thoughts, I think too helps you to kind of look at what you're good at. And I guess that's my next question for you is like, how can as women we be better at owning the things that we're good at
Mm,
without kind of having that I'm the best kind of that conceited mentality, right?
yeah. I love this question because I run a Facebook group that, anybody can join called Make Imposter Syndrome Your Superpower. And I'm always trying to egg people on, like, tell me what's going on, tell me what's going on, because I want to leave coaching that's helpful for them, right? And so there was a number of people was in the same month where, I always ask the question, what makes you want to join the group? And to a person, I keep getting promoted and I don't know why. I keep getting offered these other positions and I don't know why. And I'm afraid I'm going to let people down. So, one of the ideas that I came up with, and this is also why I love coaching and why I think of myself as your guide on the side, because I'm in partnership with the people I coach. And together, you're the one who actually has the answers. I'm going to ask questions to help you unlock them, but then together we're going to figure out how to create practices that work for you. So, in going back and forth over Facebook Messenger with this woman, I said, what if you came from curiosity and said to your bosses, hey, as I'm prepping for 2023, I'm really committed to leveling up what I'm good at because I want to really hone in on my natural talents. And I'm wondering if you can share with me what do you think are my top 3 natural talents? Because we are so bad with ourselves because of that internal thinking of the negativity and the repetition, our internal dialogue. The things we say to ourselves, we would never say to one of our best friends or our mom or our husband, or we wouldn't, are you kidding me? Right. So I think it's helpful to look outside yourself, which can feel awkward. So that's why I suggested in the realm of bettering yourself. I'm really interested this year in playing up my strengths and playing up my natural talents. What do you think? What do you think the thing I'm most talented at? Or what do you think the 3 things are that really work that you'd like to see me get even more proficient in? And then you can ask the other side of the question, is there anything in my leadership you think is missing that if it were there, it would make a difference? Any suggestions you have? People love helping each other. And in that way, that's giving you the opportunity to be in partnership. And you can ask it of your coworkers. You could ask it of your significant other. You could ask it of your daughter. What do you think mommy's good at? Here's what I think you're good at.
Hmm.
What else do you think mommy could be good at? Giving me more popsicles. Yeah, mommy's not going to get any better at that. We're not focusing on that skill this year,
Yeah.
So I think
Hmm.
that's one way. The other piece is to spend time celebrating your wins. I actually have a whole workbook that I designed for my clients called Celebrate Your Wins. And if you want, it's an ebook people can download and I can give it to you to put in the show notes. Because the brain is so focused on the negative, when it comes to the end of the year, everyone's like, oh, performance appraisals, rarely, and I'm sure your company's different. I tell people nobody should be getting news at the end of the year that you haven't been talking to them about throughout the whole year. Be doing weekly one-on-ones with your team, monthly touch bases, quarterly reviews, et cetera. So by the end of the year, you know what you need to work on and what worked and what didn't. And your boss is just sitting there listening and going, yeah, you're right. Beautiful. Okay, good. Next thing. So because we focus on the negative, usually we ruminate about what isn't working, what didn't work, how we made a mistake. We shouldn't have said this. We shouldn't have said that. Stop it. Instead, ask yourself what worked, not just
Hmm.
from the perspective of, did I achieve my goal? Because often that's our scale. I said I would do that. I didn't do it. I suck. I'm a failure. No, you grew along the way. You might not have achieved that goal, but how did you grow on
Hmm.
your way to getting there? Where did you have more fun? Where did you develop new relationships? What new skills did you develop to get to where you are today? That gives you the opportunity to reflect on your own strengths and natural talents and start building up a library where you don't have to depend on other people, because then it's okay, rinse and repeat. Let me use that success strategy again, because why, it worked before, so let me do it
Hmm.
again. And that doesn't have to be at the end of the year. You could do a monthly retrospective, a weekly retrospective. What went well this week? Why did it go well? Start there versus what didn't go well.
Sure. Okay. I love that. And I do try to do a good job of asking others for feedback, right? But instead of asking for feedback, I think it's being more intentional, as you said.
Yeah.
Um, you know, asking directly, what do you think I'm good at? So I'm definitely going to take that back. That's a great takeaway, Jen. Let's talk a little bit too about just uncertainty. Obviously, there's been a lot of uncertainty since COVID and the workplace, right? What do women need to do to be successful in this new and changing environment?
I always think about this as the future. The future of leadership is being a multidimensional leader. And what I mean by that is, as you said, COVID was the great, you didn't say this, but I'll say you said it. COVID was the great
Hmm.
equalizer in having everybody realize life's uncertain across the board, whatever socioeconomic realm you fell into, it became more and more apparent that life's uncertain because you didn't know who was going to get hit with COVID and who wasn't, and lockdown and the whole thing. That's been that way all along. Life's always been uncertain, but most of us walk around as if there's a certainty and a predictable outcome. Now, at least before COVID, life was uncertain, but it was a bit of a predictable. Supply chain was predictable. You could, do sales forecasts, right? You could do sales metrics on your calls of what you can predict from one quarter to the next, one year over the next, particular industries or clients. My guess is that shifted a lot after COVID, so it's no longer predictable. So now you have uncertainty plus unpredictability. What do you have left? The one human you have agency over is yourself and your ability to respond to any moment of uncertainty and unpredictability. That's what I call personal response dash ability, your ability to respond. So I think as women, it's imperative that we use the exact same tools that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about imposter syndrome, of taking the deep breaths, being present, separating fact from fiction, and being able to choose how I want to respond in any given situation. I call it cracking the power code. And power is an acronym that stands for pursue the facts, own your stories, witness your thoughts, embrace a new choice, and reflect and repeat. And we can put that link in the show notes if you want, where people can download an ebook and read an article that I wrote about it with, a specific infographic to use. But that honestly is the framework I use with every client, every conversation, because we don't realize that we have a choice in any given situation. Now, If you get upset about something and imposter syndrome's rearing its ugly head, or any place where your amygdala gets hijacked, there's feelings, there's thoughts, there's responses, right? There's circumstances. So when you are able to be present, then you can be at choice. And that, I think, is not just for women, it's for men, it's for kids, it's for everybody these days.
Thanks, Jen. I would love it if we can get the link to that ebook so that our listeners can read more into the power code and your framework there. I know that you work a lot with women in leadership roles, but I'd love to hear from you, Jen. Do you have any advice for women who maybe aren't yet in a leadership role but would like to get there one day?
Yeah, it's an interesting question these days because and I don't know if this piece is true, so you tell me, but you might have seen more of this than I have. It seems like what I've been hearing, like the dirt on the street, is millennials or others feel like they should be elevated to leadership positions quicker or sooner without having done the
Sure.
work. And I don't know if that's a
Hmm.
trend, if that's the truth or not. You can't believe everything you read. I think what's important to get to a leadership role is, number one, know what you're good at. I always use the assessment Clifton Strengths. And by the way, it's not bad to think you should get that promotion, but also understand you're speaking into an environment where it used to be put your time in and now you get the promotion. So it's
Right.
important to recognize it's not just about knowledge, it's also about experience, because people in leadership now, well, number one, most people are elevated to leadership positions with no training. And when they get to those leadership positions, truly people learn how to lead on the job through those experiences. You can start leading now by volunteering anywhere where you can lead a group to understand leadership qualities. You can listen to podcasts like this and other leadership podcasts, read books on it, but also know what you're good at. And I was about to say the assessment that I use with my clients is Clifton Strengths because it's a measure of natural talent and it gives you an insight into what you're good at, as well as how to demonstrate what you're good at and how to apply what you're good at work. And people who work within their strengths are 6 times more likely to love their job and talk about it. They're 8% more productive, and their engagement goes up by 23% on the job when you have companies that are managing people from a strengths based culture. So it's important for you to know your talents. And I say strengths, there's a lot of good assessments out there, Myers-Briggs, DISC, etc. But I feel like those are more personality. With strengths, it's an assessment of natural talent. I believe it's more professional and it gives people an opportunity to also articulate their value. So when you go ask for that new raise, the new job or the raise or the promotion, you can better articulate your value. That's number one, do the assessment. Number two, you don't have to wait to have every single thing, every single, all 12 requirements that are put into a job listing to apply for a job. Do it anyway. Most men, if there's 12 things on a list, if they have two of them, they're like, I'm perfect. I'm going to apply. Most women wait until we have 11.73974. You don't need to do that. If you don't think you have all the experience that the job needs, you can also articulate that in the interview and state how you're planning to learn. I will never forget, Courtney. I was living in Colorado. I was interviewing for a job to spearhead a company called the Western Clean Energy Campaign. And my job was going to be to stop 27 proposed coal-fired power plants from being built in the interior West, which we did, by the way. And two of the board members basically said to me, I had never worked in this particular energy sector before. I didn't even know that when you turn on the lights, electricity was powered by coal. I mean, and when I look at that in
Hmm.
retrospect, think to myself, duh, of course. But back then, it just, the synapses weren't connected, right? The neurons weren't connected. And they were very much digging into me. You don't have any experience in this field. What makes you think you can do it? And I said, look, I said, I can learn on the job about the industry. And I've got you and everyone else on the board who are experts and everybody else at the company. What you can't learn on the job is how to organize. And I've been organizing
Hmm.
for 25 years. That is on the job as lived. And so I don't see any problem with this at all.
Hmm.
And they hired me. So you have to know what you're good at. You want to know how to articulate it and you want to speak with confidence. What I always tell people is just smile and nod your head. Yeah. And so what I'd like is a $50,000 raise and shut up.
Right. Love it. It's almost like that fake it till you make it,
Yep.
phrase that everyone seems to use.
Yep.
So that's great.
Exactly.
So we talked a lot about, being present, separating fact from fiction, talked a lot about journaling to make sure that you're, able to identify those facts and being to what you're good at. Talked a lot about just being able to recognize what it is from your past that's causing you to maybe have this imposter mindset. We even talked about little things like deep breaths, throughout your day to overcome the moments in which you're getting a little anxious maybe or feeling like an imposter. This has all been really great stuff, Jen. I know you have a ton of wonderful resources for our listeners to tap into, especially the ebook talks about power code. Is there anything else that you'd like to plug or any other resources that our listeners can tap into?
Yeah, I would say, because as you were doing that recap, which is a very good recap, I saw you taking notes, surround yourself with other people who are interested in being leaders. What often happens when we're stuck is we wind up going to our friends to talk about stuff, and they wind up going, yeah, you're right, that's awful.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of somebody saying, actually, you're being a jerk. The best friends you can have are the people who are going to call you on your nonsense and have
Mm-hmm.
you be greater than your nonsense. That's key. Have a vision for your life, your leadership, and your legacy that is bigger than the nonsense between your ears. Because you and I know, and everybody listening knows, the space between our ears is a dangerous neighborhood. You do not want to go there alone. You will need,
Mm-hmm.
lots of help in there. So surround yourself with leaders. And I offer a monthly masterclass. I'm going to make sure it's the right date. I'm going to say it's the last Thursday of the month, where you can come in and potentially there's at least 3 people who get in the hot seat for me to coach. And it's an opportunity for you to be with other like-minded people who are either already leaders or interested in being leaders. And if you can't make that, talk to your employee resource group at work and set up a mastermind, set up at a women's employee resource group. I know you have one at your company, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really important. Surround yourself with the right people.
And don't be afraid to ask your leadership what you're good at, what your talents
Exactly.
are.
Exactly.
That's great. Jen, this has been incredibly insightful and motivating. The tips you've shared are just so invaluable to building that mindset for success I think everyone needs a little Jen in their life, right?
Oh, thank you.
This has
I
been
do
great.
too.
So just thank you again for being here and just thanks for all the work you do to help women elevate themselves, lead with confidence and achieve, success by bringing their authentic selves to work every day. You're obviously an incredible leader, and I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to sit down with you. So thanks again.
Thank you for your really probing. I guess I can say that word, like very insightful and probing questions, because it had me thinking about how to articulate some of the answers. So I appreciate all the perfectionist thought that you brought to the
You're
podcast.
welcome. I'm very eager to tap into all your resources to kind of help me work through this perfectionist mindset and overcome it. But thanks again, Jen. This has really been wonderful. And I just want to thank our listeners too for your support. As always, you can keep up with us on past and future episodes on Twitter at Smart Route Pod. We will talk to you soon. Thanks.